Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are, everybody. Thank you for joining us. This is the ARPA Institute panel discussion on what they teach children in Turkey about Armenia and Armenians. Before we start, I would like to say a few words about ARPA Institute. ARPA Institute has been working in Armenia for the past 30 years, trying to advise the government and also the public organizations on various matters pertaining to education, science, technology, healthcare, and many other fields. ARPA members are all experts in various fields, and we work as a nonprofit organization without any compensations, voluntarily, and try to advance the various areas in Armenia. And the only activity that we have outside of Armenia is organizing such panel discussions or presentations on various topics related to Armenia or Armenians. ARPA works with the government of Armenia, as I said, and also all the institutes of the Academy of Sciences and the universities. We have various projects ongoing now are the following. The most important one, or one of the most important one, is development of a clean room in the Palandjian National Lab for advanced scientific research. We just had the opening ceremony a couple of weeks ago, and now the clean room is operational. We have a few instrumentation that is being used already. However, we still need quite a few more advanced instruments and devices so that it will be a fully capable clean room. So we're working on that. And the second one is our invention competition for young scientists in Armenia. And this has been going on for 15 years. We receive various inventions from scientists and young graduate students. We send them to experts, and each of these inventions should be evaluated by at least 3 experts. Then we decide a winner. The winner receives $5,000 as a token of our appreciation, and also we try to help them, guide them, so that they can advance their invention even up to being a commercial product. So, and also we have a second place winner, and the second place winner receives $1,000. Now we also have, please mute your audio so we don't hear your discussions. We also organize teacher trainings for science fair organization in Armenian schools in Armenia. This is already the 6th year we've been doing that. The government of Armenia has adopted the program already. Now for the 3rd year this year, they are organizing it themselves. We are only serving as advisors to the government, to the director of the science fair in Armenia. And as I said, we train teachers from all over Armenia on how to organize a science fair in a school, how to guide the students in selecting their projects, how to develop a plan for their project, how to do research, how to collect data from a prototype experimentation, and then how to analyze the data, and also how to make a conclusion out of the data and present it to the judges and be able to answer questions from the judges. So this essentially teaches the students many different skills, which is very important in life. We also have, of course, our experts go to Armenia and work in healthcare, in various other fields as advisors. For example, one of our board members is the advisor of the Minister of Health in Armenia. And other board members do surgeries or try to digitize the healthcare system in Armenia, or work in biotechnology or mechanical engineering or physics, many other areas. So that's the way our board members help as much as possible. Now, I'm delighted today to have with us experts on what they teach in Turkey about Armenia and Armenians to school children. And today, the panelists, as our moderator will present them, but just to mention their names, Garine Palandjian, who is an expert in this kind of studies because she has participated in a major study with Firat Güllü, who is also in Turkey, and he has also participated in that research project, and he will also be part of the panel. And Arusyak Kochmonnet, who has been a principal of an Armenian school in Turkey for 16 years, and again, Chris will introduce them. Chris Sheklian is the moderator today. He's an expert in anthropology in the University of Chicago. He's a postdoctoral researcher at Radboud University in the Netherlands. His dissertation was on theology in the community, the Armenian minority, tradition, and secularism in Turkey. From 2018 to 2020, Dr. Sheklian was the director of the Krikor and Clara Zohrab Information Center in the Eastern Diocese of the Armenian Church in America. He has published on liturgy and law in the lives of religious minorities in the Journal of Turkish Studies and in the Armenian Christianity Today. Chris is currently working on a monograph entitled Liturgical Rites, Armenian Christian Presence in the Republic of Turkey. So he is also an expert in this area, and he will lead the discussion. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Panelists. Thank you to ARPA for hosting a really important conversation this, for me, evening. I am very excited to be the moderator today. This is a topic that is something that I encountered in my own anthropological fieldwork, but is not something that I really am an expert in. So I'm very excited to be here with a panel of folks who really do know this material, who are experts, who are going to give us some really informative and wonderful stuff to get us started on the conversation. So just to give a sense of what we're going to do here, I will introduce each of the speakers with a little more detail right before they speak. They'll each talk for a little while. They're going to give some background information, and then I'm going to come back and ask some questions to and between them. And then I will invite folks in the audience to pose their questions to the panelists, which they can do via chat. So we prefer for you to type out or let us know, and then I will sort of take those questions. So without further ado, what we're going to get here is a bit of a look at different aspects of the education system in Turkey broadly, with the focus being on this question of what is taught about Armenians and Armenia. And as we're going to see tonight, the educational landscape in Turkey can be quite complicated. And luckily, we have these experts here to help tease out some of the details of what different schools are like, what the different categories of schools are, and what are taught in these different schools. So we're going to begin. The first speaker is going to be Firat Güllü. He is a Turkish writer, translator, and theater historian who has a bachelor's and master's from Boğaziçi University in history. He's a member of the Bosphorus Performing Arts Ensemble and the editorial board of the performing arts periodical Mimesis. Firat has published 2 books on Ottoman performing art history, the Vartavan Theater Company and the Young Ottomans, and System Crisis and Theater in the Ottoman Empire, and a novel, The Man Without a Name, based on the life of Istanbul-based Armenian playwright Arman Vartanian. He also has translated Kevork Bardakjian's Hagop Baronian's political and social satire into Turkish. He's a history teacher and a member of the History Foundation and on the editorial board of Toplumsal Tarih, Social History, a very important and wonderful journal that I have taken use of at times. So that's good to know. Firat is going to begin giving us sort of our broadest overview of the Turkish educational system, and then we're going to go from there. So Firat, please.
Thanks, Chris. First of all, I want to thank you to organization committee, Dr. Panelists and Chris and Garine, to invite me this meeting and give me the chance to explain myself, my opinions here. As Chris said, I will start with a general view, the education in Turkey, and after that, our works on history education. Yes, we have in general 2 types of schools, primary and secondary education in Turkey. Public schools, every citizen of the republic will continue free of charge, and private schools that families send their children to for better quality of education by paying an annual fee without any support from government. In secondary education, public schools are also divided in different categories, secular ones, religious ones, vocational ones, fine arts and high schools, and etc. And we have also different private schools. It's important for our discussion. Private Turkish high schools, private foreign high schools, and minority high schools. These are 3 types of private schools in Turkey. The statutes of last two was regulated by the provisions of Treaty of Lausanne. One of the most important differences is their educational language. In private Turkish schools, the educational language is Turkish, and 1 or 2 Western languages are taught as second and third languages. In foreign schools, the educational languages are French, English, or Italian. And minority schools, on the other hand, are schools belonging to Armenians, Greeks, and Jewish communities. They are citizens of the Republic. And these schools were established during the Ottoman period, and their existence was guaranteed by the Treaty of Lausanne. While the other 2 categories of private schools are open to all citizens, only students belonging to that particular community, Greek, Jewish, and Armenian, can legally attend minority schools in Turkey. The educational language are Armenian or Greek. Currently, the Turkish Jewish community doesn't have any active schools other than only one in Istanbul. They have only 1 school in Turkey. In that school, the educational language is Turkish. English and Hebrew are second and third languages. According to law of Tevhid-i Tedrisat, Unification of Education, dated 1927, all of these schools are affiliated to Ministry of National Education. History is compulsory in all of these schools, and it's an obligation to adhere to common curriculum, regardless of schools type. In national exams, students are responsible for the curriculum, same curriculum. Again, regardless of the school type, history courses must be taught in Turkish. It will give more detailed information on this subject in the next part of my speech. It can be said that some elite private schools have certain autonomy in implementing the curriculum. Of course, it's never possible to leave a certain framework completely. I'm talking about a partial autonomy. However, this situation in minority schools is totally different, as Arusyak will talk about these issues in her speech later. Yes, this is the first part of my speech, and normally I will continue in my speech about our work as a group of history teachers working in Turkish private schools have been doing for the last 20 years to revise history teaching in Turkey. I will talk especially on a project on Armenian and Turkish teachers and academics carried out between the years 2016 and 18 on history textbooks in Armenia and Turkey. In Turkey, some reviewing projects on history textbooks started as a result of Turkey's European Union accession processes after the year, especially 2005. In the first step, history teachers from Turkey had the chance to meet with their colleagues from Balkan countries. The main aim of these projects was to eliminate hate speech and ethnic discrimination in the textbooks. The reports prepared within the scope of them and ensure the revision in the language using in the textbooks. Of course, how this change transforms the relationship between the teacher and students in the classroom, or whether it transforms, is another discussion topic. However, it can be said that on those days, these efforts gained a semi-official character in the beginning of 2000s, in the first decade especially. The situation was supportive for the teachers who care about the hate speech and discrimination in the class. It was helpful for us. The Turkey Armenian textbook project started in 2016, is the last and relatively late one of these history textbook projects supported by European Union. The project was initiated under the leadership of History Foundation in Istanbul and the Imagine Center for Conflict Transformation, a global organization which has headquarters in different cities, including Yerevan. The project was funded by Turkey Armenia Normalization Support Program carried by European Union. Subsequently, two sister institutions, Istanbul Bilgi University Sociology and Educational Research Center, and Yerevan-based Association of Young Historians. These sister institutions also contributed actively to the project. The project was carried out mainly in 2016 and 17 with the meetings of teachers and academics from Turkey and Armenia in Istanbul and Yerevan. And the results of these studies were converted into two separate publications in 2018 and 2019. In the first step of the project in 2016, the participants tried to reveal the general problems of history teaching in their countries by reviewing textbooks in their own countries. It's important to note 2 points here. First, although the subject was history education, the participants came together to talk about present day. All participants were aware that the conditions for talking about the past would be established today. How do today's national history education mechanisms work in both countries, and why can't young generations discuss the past around common human values? The group discussions were around these two basic questions at the beginning. Secondly, All participants focused on self-criticism of history teaching processes in their own countries and the textbooks given to the students in their own countries. They were not expected to conduct an analysis of course materials in the other country. But when the results were compared, it was understood that the process were very similar in both countries, and this time a joint study was carried out to come up with a single recipe for these common diseases. In our research in Istanbul, it has been determined what the following basic problems continue to exist despite all revision attempts in high school history textbooks in Turkey. First, the narrative in the history textbooks in Turkey is single-voiced and one-dimensional. The voice of other parties involved in the events under discussion is not heard at all. Quotations made from foreign sources or non-Muslim or non-Turkish local people don't lead to a pluralist vision. They are selected and framed in a way to further strengthen the singularity of the narrative. This is important. The historical narrative, the second point, the historical narrative in the textbooks in Turkey is historicist in that it builds a fictitious continuum that, on one hand, joins in a line of historical development of Turkic peoples of Central Asia with the Turkish nation today, and on the other hand, describes Anatolia as a motherland of Turks. And the third point, the narrative that dominates the textbooks in Turkey doesn't only alienate other groups, but transforms them into the enemies of the nation. The construction of these enemy images is done juxtaposing the others to the perpetuated goodness and perpetuated goodness and tolerance of Turks. Please let me elaborate a little more on the part of this broad narrative, and that is relevant to our conversation today. In the textbook revised after EU processes, the information that as non-Muslim communities, Greeks, Armenians, Assyrians, Georgians, and Jews lived in Anatolia before the first Turkish communities reached into the country. Considering that the names of these non-Muslim communities were avoided in previous versions of the textbooks, this can be taken as a positive development. However, at the same time, a detail was added to this narrative that all these nations were under an unjust administration during the Byzantine period, and that the Turks destroyed this unjust regime in cooperation with the help of these non-Muslim communities, local communities. By referring to Armenian chronicles written in the 11th century and before, and even by quoting from the sources of non-Muslim people, the suffering of Anatolian Christians belonging to the different sects is told in these books. In summary, it is told that the non-Muslims living in Anatolia found peace with the Turkish rule and lived under their fair rule for hundreds of years by enjoying the freedom of belief. This golden age narrative continues until the last century of the Ottoman Empire, according to books. At this stage, another character enters the narrative, the Western imperial power that had developed effective organizations in Ottoman lands in the 19th century. The narrative in the textbooks established a discourse that the local non-Muslim elements were decided by non-Muslim elements were deceived by these powers with false promises, and that the fair order in the East was disrupted by imperialist conspiracies. And in this narrative, details such as the demands of non-Muslim communities for legal equality within the scope of the concept of modern citizenship against the inequalities existing in the classical imperial order are not included. The revolts against the Ottoman rule are presented as a result of the initiatives of imperialists. Again, according to this narrative, the Turks had no choice but to protect themselves in the chaos that emerged when the order broke down. The struggle in the hostile attempts of the imperialist powers also had to grapple with the internal revolts. In summary, what happened in the Ottoman Empire in 19th century is presented as a story of betrayal and enmity. The theme of genocide, which is described as a deportation in textbooks, is also handled in this context. Since Garine will talk about the Armenian dimension of the research, I skip that part. Based on the results of the research, the teachers and academics participating in the first step wrote a joint call for institutions and organizations active in the field of history education in both countries. An English version of this text is available on internet. Maybe Chris can share the link in chat section of meeting. Here, I will only be summarize the main head links of the text. According to text, guiding principles for history textbook production and development. First, towards a de-ideologized and repoliticized history education. Second, overcoming the omniscient single voice in favor of multiple voices and perspectives. Third, addressing nationalism in history education. Fourth, addressing militarism in history education. Fifth, moving from essentialism to social constructivism. Sixth, towards diverse ways of conceptualizing time and space. Seventh, using alternative teaching methods of history. Eighth, finding the balance between contextualization and isolation of histories, approach to language of history education, going beyond the textbook as an all-encompassing source, main course for teaching. And lastly, teaching political history beyond political elites, wars, and teaching social, cultural, and everyday history. This is maybe advice to all organizations in both countries. In 2017, our team came together again. This time, we worked in mixed groups, and in the light of principles I mentioned above, 3 different course modules were created to be implemented in both countries. First, Model 1, the role of media in nation building. The second, Model 2, social movements, and the Model 3, women's movements and feminisms in 19th and 20th centuries in both countries. These models were published in Turkish in 2019. While these courses has been designed, the main goal was to put them into practice with mixed student groups from each country. But this goal is far from being applicable under the conditions we are living. The common belief of our group carrying out the project is that this hope will soon become a reality in the near future. We hope that. And this is my first part. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Firat. I look forward to talking a little bit more about this really important project. And your overview was really, really important to sort of set the parameters for what we're talking about and to give us some of those first details about what is actually in these history textbooks. So thank you for getting us started with that. Next, I would like to introduce Arusyak Kochmonnet, who is pursuing an international master's program in Armenian studies at INALCO in Paris. She has 23 years of experience in the field of education. From 2006 to 2022, she was the principal of the Karagosyan Vorpanos Varjaran Armenian School in Istanbul. She studied pedagogy at the University of Marmara in Istanbul. And Arusyak is going to sort of move us a little bit into the context of the Armenian schools and the question of the minority schools. And then we will be able to sort of have a better picture of this fuller educational landscape. So I will turn it over to Arusyak to offer this part of that.
Շնորհակալություն Քրիս, ես իմ խոսակցությանս հայերենով պիտի շարունակեմ, գուսամ բոլորիդ համար հասկանալի պիտի լա, բայց դոկտոր Պանոսյանը այդ ուղղությամբ թարգմանությունը պիտի ընե, ես նախ եւ առաջ շնորհակալություն հայտնել կուզեմ Արփա Գաջարին, որ ինձի արիթը ընձայեց այսօր թեզի հետ միասին ըլլալու եւ այս հաջելի զրույցին մասնակցելու եւ վստահ եմ, որ շատ հաշահեգան զրույց մը պիտի ըլլա, ուրեմն այո Ֆրատը իր համառոտ դեղեցություն տվավ արդեն իր խոսակցության մեջ, ես հիմա պիտի մանրամասնեմ այդ փոքրամասնության մանավանդ հայկական վարժարաններու բարական առանձնահատկությունները, ես նախ գուզեմ անշուշտ հայկական վարժարաններու այս առանձնահատկությունները որոշ վերնակիրներու դա կցեզի հետ բաժնել, մանավանդ այս վարժարաններու վարչությունը, հսկողությունը, աշակերտներու արձանագրության բարական, ուսուցիչներու պաշտոնագործումը եւ մանավանդ ուսուցման ծրագիրը եւ այս դպրոցներու մեջ գիրարգված ուսման ծրագրի մեջ ներառված այդ խտրական արտահայտություններուն աշակերտներու, ծնողներու եւ ուսուցիչներու թիդանգյունեն դեսնված բարական թեզի հետ բաժնելու պիտի չանամ, բայց հավանաբար բավարար պիտի չլա ժամանակի սահմանափակումը պիտի լա, ուրեմն այս մասին այս բաժինը երկրորդ բաժնին պիտի ցկեմ։
Թարգմանենք միջև կամ
Այո, եթե երկար չեղավ։
Ուրեմն, so Arusyak, as you heard already, she's going to speak in Armenian. What she will do is expand on what Firat mentioned about the different kinds of schools, what they teach in these schools, and then of course also she will concentrate on the Armenian schools, how the teachers are selected, how the programs are sent from the government, how the vice principals are always from the government, the principal and the vice principal, and the teaching material is also sent from the government. And so all these will be expanded by Arusyak.
Ավելցնեմ, որ այսինքն այս ստացակիրքերու մեջ հայկական բացկերը ինչպես ներկայացված է, պիտի չանամ փոխանցել մանավանդ նախագրատարանի եւ միջնագարկներու ստացակիրքերու բարակային։
So how these textbooks present the Armenian case or the Armenians, she will also expand on.
Հայկական դպրոցները 1923 թվականին Թուրքիո Հանրապետության հիմնադրութենեն ենթարկվեցան Հանրապետության նոր ընդունված օրենքներուն, անոնց նախկին ինքնավար բոլոր գառույցները, որոնք գոյություն ունեցած էին Օսմանյան ժամանակաշրջանին, գազմանուծվեցան։
So in 1923, the Armenian schools or the minority schools came under a new law, and all the freedoms of teaching and the organizational structure that they had were dismantled and restrictions were imposed.
Հայկական վարժարանները, դպրոցները, հիմնադրամներու, հայկական հիմնադրամներու ներտիգին դա քաղաքվելով իրենց գործունեությունները շարունակեցին Թուրքիո գրթական նախարարության հագագշրինդար։ Առաջին հերթին գրնանք ասել, որ այս փոքրամասնական վարժարանները իրավական երկթիմի իրավիճակը ունին։ Ինչսել է, այսինքն այս դպրոցները իրենց սեփական օրենքը չունին։ Ոչ մասնավոր վարժարան են, ինչպես Ֆրատը ասա, ոչ ալ օդար վարժարաններ են։ Այս
So in
դպրոցները
In these schools, the legal system is carried out by the government, and there's no internal legal system or rules from the schools. They should obey all the government rules, every minority school and even non-minority schools.
այս դպրոցները պետության կողմէ կընդունվին Լոզանի Տաշնակրի համաձայն գործող հաստատություններ։ Մյուս կողմէ ենթակա են գրթության ազգային հիմնական օրենքին։
So these schools work under the Lausanne Treaty laws established in 1918, I guess, and or 23. And the Armenian schools also come, but then there's also the local culture ministry administration that also has their own restrictions and laws.
Թե գրթական ազգային հիմնական օրենքը եւ թե մասնավոր վարժարաններու օրենքը երկուքը միադեղ գենթարգվի երկուքի միադեղ գենթարգվին հայ դպրոցները։ Սակայն այս վարժարաններու եւ մասնավոր վարժարաններու միջեւ շատ հիմնական եւ լուրջ տարբերություններ կգտնվին։ Մասնավոր վարժարանները Թուրքիո մեջ կհիմնվին մասնավորապես շահույթ ստանալու նպատակով։ Իսկ հայկական վարժարանները միակ նպատակ ունին իրենց մշակութային ինքնությունը բահել եւ հարադեվությունը ապահովելն է եւ ովևէ շահույթ չեն այսինքն ակնկալել
The main difference between the private schools and the public schools are that the private schools are for profit and the students have to pay, while the public schools and the minority schools are only, especially the minority schools, are only for teaching the cultural heritage of their community.
Այս դպրոցներու համար դժվար է համապատասխանել մասնավոր դպրոցները բանջված չափանիշներուն, որ արգել կհանդիսանա երբեմն որոշված սահմանափակում են ավելի թիվով աշակերտ ընդունելու, աշակերտ արձանագրելու։
So in these schools, there's only a certain number of students that can be admitted, and also it is very hard for them to compete with the public school regulations.
Այս ստանդարտները, այս չափանիշները թեև շատ արդիական եւ բիդանի են, օգտակար են, սակայն այս չափանիշները գիրառումը, որոնք բեդությունը գոկտակորձե այդ շահույթ հետաբնթող մասնավոր դպրոցները քննելու համար, փայս եւ այնպես խնդիրներ կհարաճացնի հայ դպրոցները քննելու ժամանակ, որոնց շենքերը մեծ մասամբ կառուցված են 19-րդ եւ 20-րդ դարում։
Even though these rules and regulations are important, however, the Armenian schools cannot compete with the private schools, because their structures and the school system has been created a long time ago, and so it doesn't have all the privileges that the private schools have.
Եվ գրնանք ասել, որ հայ վարժարաններու կանոնակրությունը վերջին անգամ բեդության կողմէ վավերացված է 1976-ին, որ այս կորձնական կետնի վրա արգախյալ վիճակի մեջ է եւ կորձոն չէ։
These regulations were adopted in 1976, and practically they are very hard to follow.
Այսինքն հայկական վարժարաններու կանոնակրությունն է ասիկա։
The Armenian school regulations.
Հիմա քիչ մը դպրոցներուն վարչության մասին գրնանք խոսիլ, փոքրամասնության դպրոցներու մեջ գոյություն ունի նախաբես թուրք փոխտնօրեններու բայց ներկայիս փոխտնօրեն անվանագոչումով pedagogan պաշտոնյաներ, որոնք ազգային գրթության նախարարության կողմէ կնշանակվին եւ վարչության մեջ դնորենին իրավասությունը գիսող պաշտոնյաներ են։
In these minority schools, the vice principals are always appointed from the Ministry of Culture, and they share essentially the administration of the schools.
Մինչդեռ հայ դնորենները կաննակրություններու եւ կաննակրություններուն դիրաբեդեն դեղյակ են դբրոցի I think համազոր դեղյակ դնորեններ են հայերնալ սակայն ադոր հանթետ փոքրամասնության դբրոցներու մեջ փոխդնորեններու պաշտոնավարությունը եւ փոքրամասնության դբրոցներուն վերահսկիվելը ter koyutun ունի եւ գհագասե քաղաքացիության հավասարության սկզբունքին.
These, even though Armenian principals are very familiar with all the regulations, yet the Ministry of Culture regulations make the principals, vice principals that they appoint, that this dual role essentially restricts and interferes with the freedom of the schools in their cultural presentations or cultural teachings.
Թրությունը շատ անգամ վարչական, դաստիարակչական դժվարություններ հարուցած է վարժարաններուն, որևէ արդակին թղթակցություն փոխտնօրենին ստորագրությամբ կգադարվի, նախաբես փոքրամասնության դպրոցներու արձանագրություններուն թիմումներն փոքրամասնություններու անձանոտ այս փոխտնօրեններու գողմե գնդունվեր եւ գորոշվեր.
So any letter that goes out should also be co-signed by the vice principal, and also the admissions of students will also have to be approved by the vice principal.
Այս աշակերտներու արձանագրության ընդունիլը եւ որոշում տալու բարական փոխված է 2015-ին յետ եւ այդ թվականին յետ դնորենները I think հայ դնորենները սկսած են ընդունել հայ աշակերտներու արձանագրությունները ասիկա որպես ասենք բարեփոխումը գրնանք փոս նշել.
After 2015, the Armenian principals can now admit the Armenian students, and this could be considered as a fair change.
Թրքերենի եւ թրքերեն մշակույթի դասերի ուսուցիչներու բարական գրնանք նշել, նույնպես այս ուսուցիչներն ալ pedagogan պաշտոնյա են փոխտնօրեններու նման.
The Turkish cultural and also the language teachers are also appointed by the Ministry of Culture.
1915-ին ընդունված օրենքը գա փոքրամասնության դպրոցներու թրքերենի եւ թրքերեն մշակույթի ուսուցիչներու մասին օրենքն է ասիգա.
In 1915, it was a law was created specifically for the minority school teachings of culture and Turkish language.
Այս օրենքի վճիռներուն համաձայն թրքերեն եւ թրքերեն մշակույթի դասեր անվանումով նշված դասերը, ասենք թրքերեն, թուրք լեզու եւ քրագանություն, պատմություն, աշխարհագրություն, հեղափոխության պատմություն եւ ընկերապանություն արարգաներու ուսուցիչները գրթական նախարարության կողմէ կնշանակվին ու կվարձատրվին.
So in this law states that both Turkish language, Turkish cultural history, Turkish or also sociology or any humanities subjects, and even the history of the revolution should be taught by appointed Turkish teachers.
Ըստ կանոնակրի այս ուսուցիչները 5 տարվա համար կպաշտոնագործվին. Ժամկետը ուսակալության կողմէ դարիմը գրնա երկարացվի. Այս կարգադրությունը պատճառ կլա, որ փոքրամասնության դպրոցի մեջ պաշտոնին շարունակել փափակող կամ դպրոցին կողմէ նախընտրված ուսուցիչներ 5 տարվա ավարտեն յետ հերանան թբրոցեն։
So in this essentially, these teachers, appointed teachers, time limit is 5 years, but then they can be extended for 1 more year. But the teachers who the Armenian school would like to keep, there are restrictions, and they will essentially leave the school.
Նույնիսկ երբեմն գբադահի, որ դարիմը ետ գհերանան, ուսիչը իր պապակով գրնա հերանալ, օրենքը ասորալ հնարավորություն գդա, բայց հերացող պետական պաշտոնյա ուսիչին դեղ թբրոցներու համար, հայ թբրոցներու համար նոր ուսիչիմը գրգին նշանակվիլը որոշ ժամանակ մգարնի և այս տասաբահերը գրնան երբեմն բարապ անցնիր այս ուշացումի պատճառով և երբեմն ալ թյուրին չլար հայ վարժարանի համար ուսիչ պաշտոնագոչելու բարական, ինչու, որովհետև նախաբես ուղղակի նախարարության կողմէ նշանակվող այս ուսիչները, այսինքն պաշտոնագոչվող ուսիչները օրենքի չսենք, բայց կանոնակրության մեջ եղած փոփոխությամբ դնորեններու առաջարկով բիդի գրնային այլևս հայ վարժարաններու մեջ նշանակվիլ։ Այսինքն հայ դնորենը բիդի գարենար առաջարկել նախարարության, թե մենք այս պետական պաշտոնյա այս ուսիչին հետ գուզենք աշխատի։
So sometimes the teachers that are appointed by the government leave the first year, the end of the first year, and then to reappoint another teacher sometimes takes time, and so these courses are essentially not taught for a while. And now there's a new policy that the Armenian principal can suggest for bringing a new teacher, and that sometimes works as well.
Փոքրամասնության դպրոցներու արձանագրության համար նույն փոքրամասնության պատկանող Թուրքիա Հանրապետության հայրենագից ըլլալու պայմանը կա։ Այսինքն աշակերտներ, որոնք գրնան վարժարանի մեջ կարդալ, ուսանիլ, պետք է անպայման ասկությամբ հայ ըլլան, այսինքն կամ խորը կողմե, կամ մորը կողմե։
So all the students in these Armenian schools should be Armenian, either from the mother side or the father side.
Պայման են նաև Թուրքիո հպատակ հայ
And they should also be citizens of Turkey.
2012-ին ի վեր Թուրքիո մեջ Թուրքիո ոչ հայրենագից աշակերտներ փոքրամասնություն դպրոցներու մեջ միայն հյուր ուսանող ըլլալով գրնան հաճախիլ։
If there's a possibility that some, even if they're Armenian, but non-citizens, they can only be admitted as a guest student.
Դպրոցեն հերանալու ժամանակ ալ վկայականի փոխարեն ավանդված թասերու եւ ստատված նիշերու բարփակող ցուցակ մգստանան այս աշակերտները։ Օրինավոր աշակերտ չեն իրականության մեջ։
So since they're not legally real students, they will only receive a statement that they have participated in the following courses.
Որովհետև այս աշակերտներուն ընդունման բարական կանոնակրությամբ որոշված է եւ այս փոքրամասնության վարժարաններու արձանագրվելու պայմանները օրենքով որոշված ըլլալուն համար միայն կանոնակրությամբ չեն գրնար այս աշակերտները օրինավոր աշակերտ դառնալ, այսինքն ոչ հայրենագից Թուրքիո ոչ հայրենագից աշակերտները օրինավոր աշակերտ չեն գրնար դառնալ, եթե օրենքը չփոխվի։
If this law does not change, then these students can never become a full student that will receive all the requirements and all the needs.
Օդարահբադակ աշակերտներու փոքրամասնության դպրոցներու մեջ ուսանիլը հայ փոքրամասնությունները գհետաքրքրե, որովհետև Իստանբուլ բնակող Հայաստանի հբադակ աշակերտներուն հայ դպրոցներեն վկայական ստանալով ուսանիլը ներկա կանոնակրով անգարելի է։
So with this law, the students that come from Armenia, that are students, that are children of the Armenians who have come to work in Turkey, they cannot be admitted in these Armenian schools.
Այս կացությունը Թուրքիա գտնվող Հայաստանը հբադակ աշակերտներուն ուսման իրավունքը գսահմանափակ է։
So this law restricts the Armenian students that are from abroad to be educated in their culture.
Նման է բարական Հունաստանաբնակ աշակերտներու համար ալ։
The same for the Greek students.
Because որովհետև անոնք ալ փոքրամասնության վարժարաններ են ի վերջո։
They're also minority schools.
Ինչպես ասած 2016-16-ին դպրոց արձանագրվելու աշակերտին նույն փոքրամասնության պատկանելը ստուգելու իրավասությունը դպրոցի փոխտնօրենին դրված էր, այս բարականալ փոխված եղավ տնօրենները այլևս կգարկադրեն։ Այո, այսինքն բոլոր այս խնդիրները վրա կարելի է ավելցնել, ես առաջին բաժինը հոս վերջացնեմ, հետո հարցումներու բարակային գրգին բաց թողումները գրնամ լրացնել։
So she will end this portion of her presentation, but then during question and answers, she will also talk about the rest of what she will talk about, especially on what they really teach to the students on Armenia and Armenians.
Great, thank you so much, Arusyak. Our third panelist for this today's presentation is Garine Palandjian, who holds a PhD in educational policy and evaluation, currently a postdoctoral researcher at Arizona State University, the Malikian Center for Russian, Eurasian, and East European Studies on Armenian education. She's pursued several research projects and fieldwork in Armenia on post-Soviet transformations in education, peace and inclusive education, national identity, textbook studies, and pedagogical practices. She conducted dissertation fieldwork in Armenia on pedagogical practices in the border villages and identity in Yerevan, as well as 1 month in Istanbul, Turkey. She focuses on the capacity and potential of education for peaceful relationships among ethnic groups in Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey, and to clarify the constraints of schools in fulfilling this role. She also was involved in the textbook research, so she's going to talk a little bit about that. She's going to also bring in this qualitative research aspect that she's done to this conversation a little bit. And I also do want to add that she was recently appointed the head of school at St. Stephen's Armenian School. So I think we should be very happy and proud for her as she takes up her new position. Garine, please.
Thank you so much. And I apologize. I'm at a genocide education workshop training, so I'm in between and there might be people walking by and noise. Because I have to speak right afterwards over there. So, okay, before I share a couple of slides, and I apologize again for the noise that is coming from the sides. I just want to thank Dr. Palandjian and the ARPA Institute for creating this effort. And again, I'm so sorry. I couldn't find a quieter space here. For organizing this panel discussion. I want to thank my colleagues as well for joining me on the panel, and Krista for your guidance and helping us moderate this discussion. to follow from Firat and from Arusyak's what they have both presented is the fact that these are all of the legal and minor and I'm so sorry, this noise is so loud here. So the details and the very specifics and the legal framing exists on one hand. And I think what's important is also to be able to recognize that how this impacts the people living in Istanbul and living in Turkey, right? And so in my case, what I would like to present and share is a couple of examples where you could see how teachers in Armenia navigate these kinds of spaces and structures, because primarily, but also because of the time periods. I'm sorry, I have to press pause. I'm sorry. They're laying a flower at the memorial right now, and so the teachers are walking through. I'm so sorry. Okay, so the teachers that I'm going to share a couple of their voices. I just also would like to be able to share that they are different ages and different, as the changes happened in history and the changes happened in policy, this also impacted their experiences as well. So I interviewed about 17 teachers in Istanbul. 3 were retired. 1 person is from the teachers union as a representative. And let me start with the first slide and the first example. So can everyone see my screen just to make sure?
Yes.
Okay. So here I put this quote right here because what I want to emphasize is a couple of the stories that come up during or some of the importance that came up during their responses was that we were here before 1918, right? So this happens especially when Armenians are introducing themselves to people in Turkey. And for them to be able to say that they are Armenian, they are often asked, for example, did you come here from Armenia? Then at times they're asked, many teachers think that they need to be able to explain that their ancestors were on these lands prior to the establishment of the Turkish Republic in 1918. When these teachers are in higher education spaces, particularly, for example, when they were pursuing their diplomas and furthering their education, the interaction and meeting other Turkish students in the classroom, they found that they had to be able to, again, justify how or why they are there. Where one teacher told me that she was asked, do you come by plane every day to attend class? So this very concept right here that people in Turkey, this assumption is that Turkey is for Turks only. The assumption that there are no other groups of people that live here, that belong here. And so this impacts the way that Armenians who are living there interact and experience their daily livelihoods. I would like to also share the example of one of the teachers who was when I was interviewing her, she was approximately in her late 60s. And she wanted to, and so that kind of gives you the context of when she was a student. And that's why I share that. And I want to read her words directly from the interview, if you don't mind. So because I am of a certain age during our times, when these works were more taboo. In other words, not everyone had the right to speak openly about this topic. The topic was in reference to Armenians and living in Turkey and the experiences of what it's like for them. We went to the Dolmabahce Museum, for example. Then we walked around from here to there, and there was a guide who explained over there. Then it was, over there it was, and we are asking questions. This palace, who built it? For example, they said that the Palandjians built it. We went with our teacher, who appeared to be very close to us, and said, Hocam, teacher, look, they are saying the Palandjians built it, etc. And the teacher, Turkish, said, don't talk too much, just walk your path. And our teacher didn't say these people were wrong, or they didn't have the right, or that was an awful person. They didn't say these things to us, and we were hurt, end quote. So this experience, again, I just want to make sure I want to emphasize it's also, again, in the context of the time period in which she was a student, and the way that policies and the way that politics changed in Turkey is very important to remember as well. But again, her age and her time was very important very clearly, being able to be, what's important from this teacher's experience is that being able to identify and be proud of the fact that there is this Armenian heritage, there is Armenianness here, and waiting for that teacher to kind of acknowledge that was this disappointment feeling that the teacher described, and it really impacted her. And then lastly, this other more emphasis is about the fact that there is the concept that when they are in the higher education institutions, when they are becoming classmates with other people living in Turkey, this is very difficult. It's not only within the higher education institutions, but they also are, when they are playing in the playgrounds or just growing up in their neighborhoods, there's a sense of being unsafe. And there's this sense of that they're always reminded that they don't belong here. So there's always this fear that they've experienced. And in this example here, I want to read their words as well. They described, we didn't know their feelings towards Armenians and didn't know the contradictions that they had for them as well. It was new, and maybe it was their first time getting in touch with Armenians. We don't know their background, how they are raised, how they see Christianity and Armenians. There was this parameter. We learned those things as well, and we stand a bit more conservative towards forming relationships. So in this example here, this was from a teacher who was again a little bit older, in their 50s, and also just kind of showing how Armenians are not understood. And this comes out very clear based on how Firat was giving his examples, where in the history textbooks, if you don't humanize and you don't recognize who Armenians are, they will not know who they are, right? The first interaction becomes extremely awkward and disappointing, and never mind, that they don't feel comfortable. So there's a lot of misconceptions that come up as a result of this kind of an educational atmosphere and the curriculum. So here I'm just going to pause and be able to defer my time back to Christopher and to continue from here.
Thank you, Garine. Thank you for bringing in this wonderful. As an anthropologist, I'm always particularly happy to get this nice qualitative, we could say ethnographic work that you did here. So thank you. So wonderful. So I think what we have at this point should be a pretty really wonderful sort of overview of the education system in Turkey, including especially the Armenian schools, and also thinking about what is taught. So my first sort of round of questions is really going to be for Firat and Arusyak to give them a chance to elaborate a little bit more. I know that there are a couple slides actually to show some of the textbooks that are used actually. So I want to make sure we get a little time to dig into some of those details, thinking about what is taught in some of the schools and what is not. So I'm going to kind of give both of them a chance to talk a little bit about in more detail these the actual material, the sort of the slides that are going to show some of the content there. While I see we've got the slides about ready to go, I do want to just point out I've seen a couple sort of questions, and given sort of some of the constraints, I'm curious, a little bit about the one question, is that we don't see a lot of people maybe joining us here from Turkey, and I'm not sure that necessarily we can or should read into that. I think there's all kinds of institutional and organizational reasons for what the reach of a particular Zoom event is. But I would hope that people would join us and maybe get to see this in its recording phase, because I think it's important for lots of people to be thinking about. And then I also see a question actually thinking about the comparison to, say, other parts of the Middle East. And I'm just going to go ahead and say on behalf of the panelists that unfortunately is going to be outside of the scope for what we've got time and space for today. But I think it's an important question and topic to think about how these education systems work in different countries, especially in the Middle East, but also thinking about, in America. We could ask, what are people taught about Armenians in lots of places, and also how does Armenian education work in lots of places. So I just wanted to sort of acknowledge that I've seen some of these questions as we go forward. So let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into some of the actual material that we see in some of these textbooks. So both Firat and Arusyak, I think, are gonna do a little bit of this, if that's all right. Oh, you're still muted there, Firat. I hear you trying to talk. Or I see you trying to talk.
Is it? Can you see my screen, Chris?
Yes.
Yes, but it's the paylaşıyorsunuz. Yep. So yep. So you want to come to your PowerPoint. Perfect.
It's okay. Okay. This is high school pages, some examples. This is the 10th grade book. I gave the summary of the narrative, and because of that, I will skip the details. But now, non-Muslims living in Anatolia were suffered by oppressive policies of Byzantium before the Turks arrived. This page about this, and Marco Polo's very famous, this in the Turkish history books, called Anatolia a land of Turks. In the books, this is about it. And in my opinion, the important maybe part of narrative, the people living in the Ottoman country were divided into two main groups as Muslims and non-Muslims. This is important. Since the Muslims were the main elements of the empire, the dominant power was concentrated in them. This is clearly maybe we can see the power relations in only in this page and the following pages maybe. And this is about Mehmet the Conqueror. All non-Muslims willingly adopted Muslims' sovereignty. In this page, we can see first Patrick of Greek Patrick, Gennadius, and Ottoman Sultan. And this is, yes, now this is the last year of the high school, the First World War. And here, this is the Enver Pasha. You can see the picture. The Western imperialists, England and France, as the allies of Russia, provoked the Ottoman Armenians to revolt against their own state. And we can see some maybe information about, short information about the massacres Armenians did, as here information. And here a table about the, this is maybe, you know it, historian Justin McCarthy's table, number of the Muslims killed by Armenian gangs. This is from 20th grade book. And here a letter from Dashnak leaders about a plan against the Ottoman army, a small quotation from a letter. And this is, you know, the official Turkish argument about genocide. As a result of Armenian uprisings, many Turks and Muslims lost their lives. The Ottoman Empire had to take the decision of deportation in order to maintain order under the war conditions. Exactly this way in the textbook. And the next part belongs to Arusyak's part. Arusyak, can you continue?
Thank you, Firat. Այո, Այս պատկերը մեջ ծեր դեսած էջը կպատկանի 4-րդ դասարանի, նախագրթարանի 4-րդ դասարանի
This is
ընկերային
for the
գիտություններ,
fourth grade. Yes, fourth grade.
ընկերային գիտություններու քիրքի մեջ կգտնվի
In the social sciences book.
Եվ հոս գրնամ ասել, որ հայկական հարցը շատ կանուխ դարիքին գսկսի մտնալ
The Armenian question is already being presented in this fourth grade book.
որովհետև ասկային ազատագրական բادرազմի նյութն է եւ ասիգա 4-րդ դասարանեն գսկսի դրվիլ եւ 3 էջ գա այս քիրքի մեջ այս նյութի շուրջ
This page presents essentially the freedom for the revolt or the war for freedom part, and it's found in the fourth grade books.
Հոս գտեսնեք զորավար Քազım Karabekir'i եւ քիրքեն մեջբերումը գտեսնեք կովը գարտամ
The picture is of Kazım Karabekir, the general who actually was the leader of the army that fought against the Turks, against the Russians.
ինքը զորավարներ արևելյան ջագադի եւ այս 4-րդ դասարանի ծրագրի մեջ այս տասի ծրագրի մեջ կտասավանդվի արևելյան ջագադը եւ հարավային ջագադը.
In this textbook, they teach about the Eastern Front and the Southern Front, which was under the control of Karabekir.
Karabekir's control only Eastern.
Only the Eastern, okay.
Kazım Karabekir հայկական պետությանը հիմնադրության հույսով տաշնագից երկիրներում վստահելով 1920 թվականին արևելյան Անադոլու մտնող հայերը հաջող հարձակումով արևելյան սահմանեն անտին նետեց. Ասիկա քիրքեն մեջբերում ունեն. Եվ
Karabekirը ուրեմն արևելյան սահմանը թափանցած հայ բանակը սահմանեն դուրս նետեց, որոնք դրդված էին արտասահմանյան ուժերու կողմէ.
Հոս նաև կտեսնենք, որ Քազım Karabekir'i կներկայացվի այդ շրջանի պատերազմին ետք որբ մնացած թուրք որբերը խնամող եւ իր հսկողության դակ առնող դիվարմը.
So he's also presented as the savior of all the orphans, the Turkish orphans that were due to the massacres of the Armenians, and he was the caretaker of these orphans.
Next example, please. Հայեր ներքին թշնամիներ եւ գայսերաբաշ երկիրներու արտաքին թշնամիներ, այսինքն արտաքին երկիրներու գայսերաբաշ երկիրներու կորձագիցներ լավով ներկայացված է այս
Armenians were considered as the internal enemy and as the allies of the foreign powers against Turkey.
Գմեջբերեն քիրքեն Մուդրոսի զինաթաթարան հետո մեր հարավային նահանգները նախ
After the Mudros Treaty, our southern states, our southern regions,
նախ անգլիացիներու, ապա
first by the English, then by the French, were conquered.
Ֆրանսացիները շրջանի մեջ ապրող հայերու հետ կորզակցեցան.
The French were working with the Armenians of the region.
Ֆրանսացիներու կողմէ զինված հայերու հարձակումներու դիմաց
those Armenians that were armed by the French against them.
զինված ընդհանուր նախատեսություններն գներեք ֆրանսացիների կողմից զինված հայերու հարցակումների դիմաց թուրք ասկը թիմատրության զորախումբեր գազմելով ինքնինքը պաշտպանեց եւ արիափար պայքարելով ոդունցկողները իրենց խողերեն դուրս հանեց երկար եղավ բարոն Փանոսյան
So the Turkish government organized resistance armies that fought against these invaders and conquered, yes, and reconquered the regions.
Next page, please. Firat. Maraşi hay եւ ֆրանսացի ասալ ուղագի մեջ բերում է քիրքեն ճագերդի մեջ դրածեն Մարաշի հայ եւ ֆրանսացի զինվորները գահարցագին թուրք գիներուն գնահատագեն գիներուն պաշտպան կանգնող ճակմակճ սայթը
The Armenians of Marash, armed by the French army, and they kill the Turkish women.
հարցագեցան գսե
Yes, and they
սկիզբեն արնեմ
yeah.
Մարաշի հայ եւ ֆրանսացի զինվորները գահարցագին թուրք գիներուն գնահատագեն գիներուն պաշտպան կանգնող ճակմակճի սայթը գնահատագեն
Yeah. So the French and the Armenian fighters attack the Turkish women, and they also kill the İnçeranlı.
Գիները պաշտպանող ճակմակճի սայթը գնահատագեն գիներու
They
պաշտպան
kill Çakmakçı Said, who was essentially the savior of the protector of the women, Turkish women.
Այս տեպքին թեմանտիման ասկային հերոս հայրենասեր մարաշճի սրճի իմամ շուտով դուրս գելը իր խանութեն ու կսպաննի զինվորներեն մեկը
So one of the locals kills the one of the soldiers of the Armenians.
One of the soldier գսե
One of the soldiers.
այսինքն հայտնի չէ որ գրնա ֆրանսացի լավ գրնա հայ լավ հայտնի չէ
Okay, one of the soldiers, either Armenian or French.
Այո next page Firat, please. In middle school history book ասալ 8-րդ դասարանի հեղափոխության պատմություն տասենսենք
This is for the 8th grade, about the history of revolution.
Turkish Revolution. Հոս Կովկասյան ջագադի մասին է
The Caucasian Front.
Եվ 1915-ի թեփքերը եւ դեղահանության օրենքը.
In 1915, the law of 1915 about deportation of the Armenians.
Գմեջ բերեմ Օսմանյան կառավարությունը միջոցներ ցերնարգեց դեղահանվածները իրավաբաններու
The Ottoman government took measures to take care of the deportees.
իրավաբաններու հսկողության դակ ուղարկելու ուղղությամբ.
That specially appointed guards will accompany the deportees.
Ստեղծած հանձնախումբը չանած բավարարել դեղահանվածներու ապահովության, առողջության, սննդի գարիկները.
The created committee tried to take care of all the needs of the deportees.
Նաև զանոնք դեղատրեց հարմար խողերու վրա եւ հրահանգեց
And they took the deportees to proper locations.
եւ հրահանգեց որբեսի անոնց դրամատրվի իրենց նախկին դնդեսական թիրքին համապատասխան
and ordered that they be given the same essential conditions as they had in their location before.
Ama badaskan anşarj kuyker dırvi.
So be given houses and land and whatever they had before.
Այս հրահանգներու մեջ պահանջեց նաև որ հողագործներուն եւ արհեստավորներուն գործիքներ եւ սերմնարան դրամատրվի որբեսի
They also ordered for the farmers to be given both material tools and seeds to be planted.
սերմնարան որբեսի գարենան արդատրությունն է.
So they can create their own food.
Next page, please.
Okay.
Հոս գբատվի ասկային կոյության թշնամի գազմագերբություններ, մեկ այլ պրոգրամասնություն, որ գփապակեր բեդություն հիմնել, Անադոլի մեջ ինչպես հույններ հայերն էին, զինված հայ հրոսակներ խմբավորվեցան հնչակյան եւ տաշնակյան գուսակցություններու շուրջ նկարը ցույց կտա արդեն.
There were rebels who organized themselves against the government of Turkey, and they came under the flag of the Tashnaks and the Hunchaks.
Firat, next page.
Okay.
And the last one will talk about the Yesal լեզուները իրար խառնվեցան ավելի լավ վիդելա ես գրգին հայերենով տեղեկությունդամ այս նկարը ցույց կտա 2015-ին եղած այսինքն իրականացած գրթական նախարարության կողմէ գազմագերբվող միջնակարգ 8-րդ դասարանի աշակերտներու համար
This part was created in 2015 for 8th grade students.
Գիրարգվող լիսեներու մդից գետրոնական քննության հարցումներեն մեկն է ասիկա.
One of the questions of the 8th grade for the 8th grade exams for a lycée degree.
Այս հարցումու անշուշտ կպատկաներ քիչ առաջ ինչպես օրինակներ ցույց տվինք այս դասակիրքերու մեջ այս նյութերը արդեն գարձածվին եւ ներառված են ուրեմն հարցումներ գահարցվի այս քննություններու մեջ բայց առաջին անգամ այսպես դեղահանության վերաբերյալ հարցումը հարցվեցավ 2015-ին.
So in 2015, there was a question about the deportations to the 8th grade students, which was related to what is being taught in the textbooks.
Գարձեմ թարգմանելու մեջ չկա հոս անգլերեննալ գտեսնվի արդեն բարձաբես գրնակ գարտալ արդեն հարցումին ճիշտ պատասխանը ճագերդյալ արդեն ցեղասպանության ժխտումն է ասիգա
The right answer for the question about the deportations is that the genocide did not happen. Is the right answer.
Դեղահանության փուն նպատակով Անադոլի մեջ հայոց քոյության վերջ տալու նպատակը չկար, այսինքն չէր փապակված այսպես բանը.
It was not meant for the Armenians to be taken out of Turkey completely. That wasn't the reason for the deportation, according to this.
Նպատակը այս չէր ասել. Ուրեմն այս քննության պետք է ընդհանրենք, որ այս քննության Թուրքիո մեջ բոլոր 8-րդ դասարանի աշակերտները գտնան գորներալ հայ աշակերտներն ալ նույն
So this
հարցումներում
was for all students in Turkey, including the Armenian students.
Եվ այդ տվականին այս քննությունները այսինքն ընդրովի չէր բոլոր աշակերտները գմտնային
It's mandatory for everybody.
երրորդ հասարանի բայց մի քանի տարի ի վեր այս լիսեներու մդից քննությունները այսինքն գամավոր է եթե գուզեն կմասնակցին բայց շատ մեծ մասնակցություն կա արդեն այս քննություններում բայց պաշտոնական քննությունն է բեդության կողմը կգազմագերբվի այսինքն կարևոր է
This official exam now is not mandatory for everybody. Whoever wants can take it, but then there is quite a big participation by the students of Turkey. This is the last one?
Yes.
Okay.
Great. Thank you both for sharing these examples of pages out of some of these textbooks. I mean, this is you know, I don't know, maybe it wasn't quite as conversational, but I think this is deeply important to get this chance to look at some of these pages, thinking about the exam question as well. I mean, I've got a couple things that am interested in, but for everybody who is watching now, if you do have some other questions, I know some people have typed things in, but please feel free to type in other questions and I will take them up as I can. You know, I see Garo's question here about basically the disappearance of Armenians, and you know, I think underneath this question obviously is stuff that both Firat and Arusyak have now addressed, which is, you know, how is the genocide talked about or not talked about? I think we saw this in the example as well of the exam question that Arusyak just showed us, right? But I also think, if I understand Garo's question, that the other way of asking this is not say the positive question, positive in the sense of what do they teach about the genocide, but in fact, how do you explain the now non-presence or the marginal population presence of Armenians in Turkey? Is anything taught about that, right? We've seen these concrete examples of what, you know, non-Muslims were, you know, welcomed the Sultan's rule. Armenians were actually more persecuted under the Byzantine Empire than they were under the Ottoman Empire. We've seen these examples of these sort of concrete, you know, constructive in the sense of, you know, they are built, they offer you something, statements about Armenian history. But is there any explanation for the fact that, you know, if you look at numbers, there were many Armenians and now there are fewer Armenians? Is this absence, maybe we can say, taken up in the textbooks in any way? And I think that's both for Firat and Arusyak.
Yes, right.
You're right. It's a big, maybe blank page about this fate of Christians, of Ottomans in the textbooks. And normally in a curriculum, there is no point about this. Only World War I and the war of independence during those days. We are talking about conflicts of Turkish people with Christians. After that, a republic is a new beginning, and then suddenly this kind of conflicts disappearing. And the answer is white blank page in official curriculum. But we have some maybe opportunities in the class, of course, and too many popular maybe serials, for example, in Netflix, maybe you know The Club, for example. Club is a very famous and popular serial in Netflix. And because of that kind of popular, maybe cultural events, we can talk about easily to the students about this kind of things. For example, 5th and 6th of September against Christian citizens of Republic, you know. Normally there is no even a word in the curriculum, but we can use this kind of opportunities, and we can create this kind of opportunities in the class, especially in private schools. We have little bit autonomy about this, and we can use maybe some methods. For example, we can use different voices from history together, and we can ask students, what's your opinion about this? All of them. Can you see the big picture, wider picture? We can ask them, and we can create this kind of opportunities. But normally, officially, it's a big blank page.
Thank you. I know that Garine, as she has let us know, has multiple obligations this evening. I just wanted to give you a chance, if you've, after sort of thinking through what your other panelists have said, if you have anything else you might want to add, or if you have questions that you might want to pose to your other panelists, just to make sure that you get your voice in there again before you have your next activity today.
Thank you. Actually, they came by to ask me to go set up, so I apologize. I'm trying to be in 2 places at once, and it's been very difficult. But thank you for having me on the panel right now. There's going to be some more noise again right now, so I'm sorry for that. I wanted to, one thing that Firat just said right now, in terms of how teachers are teaching about this in Turkey, what is important is also I think you maybe didn't share, is that this experience of teaching it in Turkey is often either from, it's very treacherous, right? So teachers can get caught. They are put on a certain list that Firat, I don't know if you want to share a little bit about how that can take away your rights as a citizen, just for talking against Turkishness. But anybody doing research and doing work around this topic, unfortunately, are almost either dismissed or considered a traitor. And I think this is something we need to kind of think about more as we go. And perhaps as a question to leave my peers would be, considering what you know about the current state of the field of education, particularly for the Armenian community in Turkey, but also more broadly, Firat, what are the next steps in your perspective? What still needs to be done? How do we get there? Because this is very difficult and challenging, and it can't be done alone, and we need to work together. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
My opinions, Garine. Always the biggest power is face-to-face communication and meetings of people from Armenia and Turkey. And Hrant Dink also said this, face-to-face meeting is very important power to change maybe everything. You know it. You maybe observe this with Turkish and Armenian colleagues came together, and a little bit later can talk about everything. Maybe not just beginning, but later. It's important, the beginning, the first moment, maybe, to give chance each other. But later on, you can talk about everything. In my opinion, if we can find opportunity to exchange students to country, and opportunities to meet students and teachers in one, maybe one meeting in Istanbul and another one in Yerevan, it will be the greatest power for future, in my opinion, the face-to-face contact. And all of these alternative lesson designs, all of them for for this aim. You know my opinions about this.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, Garine, as well. So there's actually, I see one question here that is probably directed for Arusyak that I think is a pretty straightforward one. I'll ask that momentarily. And then I see two others that are sort of the same question that is an exciting one for us to maybe end a little bit on, actually. I think that's probably a good thing that actually didn't come up. Before I take those, though, I know, I had really wanted to set out some of the differences between some of the different kinds of schools. I think that we've got a pretty good handle on a lot of that. I think Firat and Arusyak, given the sort of, what are the rules that go into the minority schools, I feel like we have a pretty good handle on that. But before I take these last two questions, if Firat or Arusyak, if you want to add anything to the sort of the distinctions between the schools, and how that plays into what is taught in which schools. I'll just give you the floor to elaborate on that a little bit.
Այո, հարցումին նախ բադասխանեմ, այսինքն բատմություն տասավանդող հայուսիչներ կան արդյոք հայ վարժարանի մեջ, չի կան։
Are there any history teaching teachers in Armenian schools? Is the question.
Չի կան, այո։
There are none.
Ինչպես նշած էի, մինչև 2015 այս ուսուցիչները ուղղակի բեդության կողմէ կնշանակվեին։
Until 2015, these teachers who would teach history would be appointed by the government.
2015-ին ետքը այս ուսուցիչների նշանակման մեջ դնորներուն առաջարկներն նկատի առնելու այդ բարական գամնակության մեջ դրվեցավ։
After 2015, the suggestions of the principle, the Armenian principle, was being also considered, and that statement was placed in the regulations.
Այսինքն երբ որ մենք չենք ընդրել նախարարության կողմէ կնշանակվին այս ուսուցիչները, ուրեմն արդեն երկար տարիներ այս ուսուցիչները որոշ հատկություններով գնդրվեին եւ գղրգվեին փոքրամասնության վարժարաններում.
Those teachers that were appointed by the government, they already had their own ways of teaching and the material of teaching, and they would continue doing the same in the Armenian schools.
Ընդհանրապես ասկությամբ թուրք կլային, քիչ ավելի ասկայնական ուսկացումներով դոկորվածները ավելի գնահնդրվեին անշուշտ եւ այլն, այսինքն քիչ փոքրամասնական ընդհանուր փոքրամասնական վարժարաններում մեջ խնդրական վերապերումներու արիտ կուդար դժվարություններ կհարուցեր եւ այս թշկողություններ շատ անգամ հայ վարժարաններու ներկայացուցիչներու կողմեալ ներկայացված են եւ ի վերջո այդ 2015-ին ետքը երբ որ մենք սկսանք մեր առաջարկները ներկայացնել որպես ուսուցիչ ավելի այսպիսի ասենք ժողովրդավար մոդեցումով տասավանդող կամ այսպիսի խնդրական վերապերում չհարուցող ուսուցիչներու վերապերումը ավելի մեղմացուց դպրոցներու մթնոլորտը.
So before 2015, this kind of appointments of teachers who would be considered more extremist would create problems for the minority schools. But after the 2015 new approach was more essentially popular, and it reduced the frictions in these areas.
Այո, ուրիշ ինչ կնամավեցնել, ապայց ասիգա պետք է բարեփոխվի անշուշտ, այսինքն պետք է ջամփան բացվի հայ ուսուցիչներու համար, pedagogan համալսարաններու, ֆակուլտետներու մեջ, մանավանդ պատմության, աշխարհագրության ուսուցիչներ հասնին եւ այսպիսի սահմանափակում պետք չէ որոլա հայ ուսուցիչներն այս տասերը պետք է գարենան մեր դպրոցները ներս հայ վարժարանները ներս դասավանդեն.
This situation should improve, and the Armenian teachers who study geography and history in the universities should be also allowed to teach these topics in the schools.
Great, thank you. So yeah. Oh,
Yeah, okay. Maybe
okay.
later.
Okay. Yeah, so this was the question that Hovannes had posed about the history teachers. And so thank you. This, I think, also gets again at the differences between what is happening in some of these schools. And one of the things as we were preparing that I think is important to note here is that, you know, certain things are explicit in law and certain things are not explicitly stated, but are sort of done, right? So I think what Arusyak sort of pointed us to a little bit here is that it doesn't say, there's no, say, rule that an ethnic Armenian couldn't be the history teacher here, but that they must be state appointed, and the state is simply just not appointing ethnic Armenians, right? And Arusyak then went into all the ways in which, you know, these are being negotiated. And so I think that this is a kind of an important broad point to keep in mind. I know it's something that's come up, you know, thinking about especially the administration of the minority schools explicitly, right? Which is what is explicitly said, stated, or ruled in law versus what sort of you can follow the law and have certain things still keep happening, like no Armenian teachers teaching history. So I see two questions that are basically to me the same question that I think is worth maybe sort of using as our sort of final question to think for a little bit, which is about the role of the internet. And I think that this is a great question because, of course, you know, what is taught anywhere is now subject to independent verification on the internet. Anybody can look things up on the internet, and what they find, of course, is another story. But in terms of thinking about some of the narratives that we saw presented in these textbooks, you know, if you get online, you know, even if you look up, for instance, I was just looking at Justin McCarthy's Wikipedia page. Even his Wikipedia page tells you that most people consider him to be a genocide denier who, you know, follows the Turkish line. So, you know, you could even have an expert witness or an expert, you know, a so-called expert in this case, right? So the Turkish government can put the numbers from Justin McCarthy's book in their textbooks, but a student who says, oh, okay, let's look this person up, can find on Wikipedia that people think that he is a genocide denier, which should then, you know, get you sort of questioning. So in that sense, the sort of the ability to research on the internet should confront some of these narratives, and that's what a couple of these questions have suggested. So maybe as a way of having a nice kind of broad final question for both of you, how do you think this has or has not changed things in the last, you know, since both of you have been teaching, right? I mean, the sort of the vast wealth of what is available on the internet is much greater in the, you know, than it was 20 years ago even. And people's access to the internet in Turkey is much greater today than it was 20 years ago. So do you think that this has changed things, and will it change things? Will it cause problems for the way that things are taught? Do you see students arguing maybe, as a result of things that they've seen on the internet. So that would be a way of combining a couple of those questions. Yeah.
Yes, you're right. There's too much information, but too much information on internet, you know. But the important thing is ability to collect data and creating concepts and frameworks, because you know you can find denialist pages, of course, together with maybe a genocide narrative together. And if you side on this issue, if you are a side, so you can choose your side in the pages also. And because of that, the important thing we need is to teach our children to take the issues in a greater way, maybe can understand all parts, and maybe it's important ability, historical empathy also is another thing. We can teach these kind of abilities and to read maybe information and collect data and create concepts and frameworks. So our future generations can maybe think about these issues without being a side. Maybe they can maybe open to different kind of maybe opinions, and so maybe they can continue to talk about the past easily. I hope that. But only internet and only information on internet is not enough, in my opinion, because you can find black and white together, even all the colors, maybe gray also, and not enough. We have to teach our students some abilities about that information, using that information, and concepts and frameworks important, and teachers really important in this issue, I think. It's my opinion. Arusyak?
I agree, yeah.
Ես հալ գավադան, որ անշուշտ հիմա այնպիսի թարում չենք, որ համացանցը գա, այլևս թբրոցները գետրոնու չեն, այսինքն նախքին ժամանակներու վես միայն ուսումը թբրոցներ են չեր ստացվել, հիմա մեդիան շատ ավելի զորավոր է.
The media is pretty strong nowadays, and it's not like what it used to be, that that's the only teaching location is the school. So now there's information on the internet as well. Yes.
Բայց այդ դեղեցություններուն հասնելու բարական ալգարևոր է. Այսինքն քանի Թուրքիո մեջ քանի աշակերտ, քանի ուսուցիչ այս հայկական հարցի բարակային իր աշակերտները գուղե համացանցի մեջ դարբեր հետազոտություններ ունելու կամ քննական մոդեցումով այս հարցին նայելով դարբեր բրբդումներ ունելու գուղե.
But the important question is how many teachers in Turkey and how many students in Turkey are guided to go to the right sites and learn about the history that the international community is presenting.
Անձնական լալով որևէ այսինքն բադանիմը երեխամ ասիգա գրնանել, բադանիմը գրնանել, բայց պետք է հդակրկրված լա այս նյութով.
They have to be interested in this subject in order to go and study it.
Երևակայեցեք, որ Թուրքիո մեջ, այսինքն ինչպես Ֆրատստավ մասնավոր վարժարաններու մեջ ուսում ստացող էլիտ վարժարաններ նկատեց նշեց այս դպրոցներու մասին, ուսանող աշակերտներ կա, նույնիսկ անոնք անգամ այդքան հետաքրքրված ձևով չեն երթար համացանցեն այդքան չեն բրբդեր, Գնտունին երբեմն իրենց տրված այդ դեղեցություն եւ այդ
Even-
չափ կկոչեն
Even students in private schools, the elite schools, they actually most of the time agree with what they are being taught, and they are not really interested in going and further studying the internet.
Ուրեմն սելուզածս ինտերնետը գա, համացանցը գա, բայց ինչ ծևով, ինչ նպատակներով ադիգա գկործածվի եւ որքան մեզի գնվածտե ադիգա ասոնք կարևոր են, բայց թրկական I think այս բադումը հայոց հարցի շուրջ չի գնար այս ծևով երկար ադեն հարաճանալ.
So the internet is there and the information is there, but then the interest is very limited, and also the narrative that is presented by the Turkish government and the Turkish media is there, and that cannot continue forever like this.
Ի վերջո այս հասարակությունը եւ պիտի փոխվի գամած պիտի փոխվի եւ իր դեղեցությունները ինքը պիտի քաղի ծևով
The community is going to change their attitude eventually, and somehow they're going to learn the truth from the internet.
I think
Շատ ներողություն, թեր դպրոցները եւ դասակիրքերը շատ կարեւոր են, ասոր վրա գրգին գետրոնանալ պետք է, ես շատ կարեւոր կնկատեմ, որ մանավանդ եթե գուզենք այս դղակը, այս աշակերտները փոքր դարիք են, այս ադելության կամ թշնամական ըսկացումներով չհասնին եւ չսերմանեն այդ ըսկացումները այս աշակերտներու մոտ պետք է դասակիրքերը անպայման դասակիրքերեն մակրվին այս արդահայտությունները եւ պետք է ներառվին փոքրամասնություններու պատմությունը թրկական պատմության քերու մեջ.
The textbooks, what is in the textbook is very important, so that this one-sided narrative and the hatred and the enmity towards minorities can be removed. The textbooks should be modified and changed.
Պետք է չորրորդ դասարանի դասակիրքի օրինակները դվի, օրինակ էջեր գար այդ քիրքեն, պետք է հայոց կամ հույն կամ այլ բոլոր փոքրամասնություններու մասին պատմության մասին օրինակներ պետք է դրվի.
In the textbook there should be examples of the Armenians, the Greeks, and all minorities about their history. There should be some examples in the textbooks.
Նախաբաշարումները այսպես գրնա парадիլ դղոց մոտ որնակ չորրորդ դասարանի դասակիրքի մեջ ինքնության վերնակիր մգա դարբեր մշակույթի պատկանող երկիրներեն օրինակներ գդրվի գոր Ֆինլանդիայի օրինակը գա Ճապոնիայի օրինակը գա անշուշտ է պետք է սորվին լավ որ սորվին օդար երկիրները հերավոր երկիրները բայց ինչու՞ չէ այսքան դարի միասին ապրած ժողովուրդներուն մասին դեղյակ ինչու չլան ինչու անոնց լեզուն չգիտնան.
Why there are examples, for example, about the cultures and histories of foreign countries like Finland and Sweden and others. Why? I mean, that's important to learn about those things. Why aren't they also presenting examples of the peoples that they have lived with in the past, like Armenians and Greeks?
Հայաստանը չորրորդ դասարանի քիրքի մեջ միայն կներկայացվի որպես այսինքն սահմանագիծ այսինքն երկիր բայց որևէ թիվանական հարաբերություն չունի Թուրքիան Հայաստանի հետ.
Armenia is presented in the 4th grade textbook as a neighboring country which Turkey does not have any political or diplomatic relations with.
As tasa kirkiru barakan şat yergar çımızır go payçat pan osfelik şat panerga yete uri şartınlar ulla. Şat şunlar galip.
There's a lot of things to talk about regarding textbooks, but the time is limited. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that actually Arusyak touched on a little bit of Manuk's question there. You know, that the day will come when this changes, and it's not only going to come from the internet, but that actually this textbook question is deeply important to changing some of these attitudes. And indeed, if there is good new research, if it gets reflected in the textbooks, that will be something that changes. So I think that this was a wonderful kind of way to think about the ending our conversation here. I mean, there's so much that we could talk about, of course, and I will not take the last word. I will give the chance if Firat or Arusyak, if you have anything else that you really feel important to add. But Arusyak, I really it was, I think, very forceful and very important statement there. But if you have, either of you have more you would like to add, and then of course I'll go to sort of close us out. Thank you, everybody.
Firat, do you have anything you want to add?
As Arusyak said, there is too much thing. Maybe we have to talk, but the time limited. I think we can find new opportunities for this. Thank you for your invitation to the meeting.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chris, for your excellent guidance and moderation. And thank you, Firat and Arusyak, and also Garine, who had to leave, I guess. Thank you very much for this very interesting and very deep analysis and discussion. Of course, these kind of issues are always based on trust. If there's no trust between people, between countries, then there's no belief in what they say, and there's no communication, and there's no way to actually agree upon a subject. So the trust should be built by, as Firat mentioned, by meetings, by actually coming together and accepting each other, and accordingly being able to go towards the truth. So we hope that will be achieved eventually in Turkey, and also Armenia will be able to cooperate with the Turkish government, and the people will realize what needs to be done. Thank you very much for you all for your participation, and you will receive our announcements for the next upcoming event, hopefully soon, and we hope that you can join us again. Thank you very much all, and we'll see you next time.